fantástica sede de la unidad de seminarios Ignacio Chávez de la UNAM. Mi nombre es Rafael Lozano, para quien no me conozca. Vamos a tener la sesión inaugural del Comité Independiente asesor del Instituto para la Métrica de la Salud, para la carga de la enfermedad. Y la introducción la voy a hacer en español y después vamos a pasar a inglés porque toda la reunión va a ser en... Acompañan en el podium la doctora Ana Carolina Sepúlveda, la directora de la Facultad de Medicina. El doctor Peter Piot, quien es el presidente del Comité Independiente. El doctor Christopher Murray, quien es el director del Instituto para la Métrica y Evaluación de la Salud. La doctora Fátima Mariño, profesora de la Universidad de Sao Paulo. Y la doctora Emanuela Gaquitu, profesora del Instituto para la Métrica y Evaluación de la Salud, que llegó hace 15 minutos a México. Y aquí está. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to switch to English, and thank you for being here, all of you. So let's give the floor to Dr. Sepúlveda to give us the welcome remark. Podium, or you want to stay there?
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to give you all the warmest welcome to the University City, home of our highest house of studies, as the National Autonomous University of Mexico is known. On behalf of our university president, Dr. Leonardo Lomelí Vanegas, and in my role as Dean of School of Medicine, we offer you the facilities of this seminar unit so that you can feel at home and can successfully and calmly carry out the activities planned for this 23rd session of the Independent Advisory GBD Committee study from Monday 4th to Wednesday the 6th. I understand that this is the second time this meeting is held in Mexico, but I am sure it will be unforgettable for you this time. It is a very nice coincidence with the annual celebration of the Day of the Dead, so you can get to know our traditions, such as the offerings, ofrendas, and hospitality more close. The name of this building is a source of pride for university workers and students of UNAM, especially for those of us who come from medical school. But I would dare to say for all Mexicans. Dr. Ignacio Chávez is the father of cardiology in Mexico. In 1944, he founded the National Institute of Cardiology, which bears his name and where the best cardiologists of the country and from several countries of Latin America have been trained. His school is recognized globally. In addition, Dr. Chávez was also president of this university from 1961 to 1966 and is still a source of inspiration for all of us. Since I received a letter from Dr. Peter Piot requesting the possibility of holding the meeting in Mexico at UNAM facilities, I realized that it was a distinction that we should attend to. After 3 months of preparations, here we are at this open session where we will have speakers of the highest prestige worldwide. I would like to express my gratitude to all of them for agreeing to share their experiences and knowledge with us. Thank you very much, Professor Chris Murray. It is a pleasure to welcome you again and reaffirm our commitment to collaboration between the IHME and the Faculty of Medicine. This meeting confirms the interest expressed in the letter of intent that was signed in May 2023. Thanks, Dr. Piot, for selecting us as a venue for this important meeting. We are also looking forward to listening to your inspiring words. Many thanks also to Emanuela Gaquidu and Dr. Fatima Mariño, not only for sharing your experiences with us, but also because your presence in the panel reflects the importance of women in research and teaching. You should know that after 446 years, I have the honor of being the first female director of the School of Medicine, and that it is currently a school in which at least two-thirds of the students are women. I am sure that the presence of women in the development of science and the GBD is fundamental. I recognize and respect the importance of the study of GBD at the global level. After 3 decades of methodological development, it has matured enough to occupy spaces in the political agenda of health in many countries and international agencies. The methodological contributions of the Global Burden of Disease study are recognized by the international community not only for the rigor of its publications, but also for the impact it has had on the training of human resources in health. We are seeking to incorporate content from the study of the burden disease in the training of undergraduate health professionals, not only in the medical career, but also in nursing, dentistry, and psychology. Together with the Division of Postgraduate Studies and in conjunction with IHME, we are promoting the creation of a diploma in health metrics for 2025. Our scope is to integrate students of all Latin America region. Mexico is one of the countries that have been very close to the GBD developments. I should mention that it is one of the pioneers in the national study of burden of disease. In 1995, the results of the estimates of burden of disease in Mexico were published for the first time in an academic journal. After that, the GBD results have been the source of more than 50 papers and have influenced the national health policy in different ways. This process has continued, and I have already been part of that story. In my role as editor-in-chief of the Gaceta Médica of Mexico, the official academic journal of the National Academy of Medicine of Mexico, we published a special issue on the burden of disease, injuries, and risk factors in Mexico 1990-2021. This issue has as guest editors Dr. Rafael Lozano and Roberto Tapia, who convened more than 80 co-authors. More than half of them are women from 14 academic institutions, and they have published 14 original articles. Never before had such a comprehensive issue been published on health conditions in the country, and neither in a national journal in Spanish. This issue presents specific papers of the main causes of burden in Mexico: diabetes, chronic kidney disease, cirrhosis, musculoskeletal diseases, mental illnesses, among others. The special issue also includes 3 articles that address the burden attributable to metabolic factors, environmental risk factors, and overweight and obesity. I understand that this afternoon the IAC will have a closed meeting to learn about the progress of the work of the GBD network of collaborators in Mexico. I have to mention that the majority of the speakers are professors of UNAM. Let me conclude this speech by sharing with you some facts and seeking to call your curiosity to learn more about our university. The National Autonomous University of Mexico is a public university. It has several campuses in Mexico City and many others in various locations across the country, as well as a presence in 9 other countries. UNAM has 34 research institutes, 26 museums, and 18 historic sites. A portion of the university city, UNAM's main campus in Mexico City, is a UNESCO World Heritage since 2007. UNAM was founded in its modern form on September of 1910 as a secular alternative to its predecessor, the Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico, the first Western-style university in North America, founded in 1551. Neither you nor I believe in rankings, but UNAM is ranked 15th among universities with the most students in the world, 370,000. And according to its performance, it is located in the top 10 in Latin America, several times the best of the country and around the 100 worldwide. Allow me to reiterate my sincere welcome to the IAC members to the University City and my gratitude for having chosen UNAM as the venue for the event. I would also like to thank the entire audience for accepting my invitation to this open session and to publicly acknowledge the people in charge of organizing the event. Congratulations. I wish you much success in the development of your meeting. Por mi raza hablará el espíritu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sepúlveda, for your kind words. Our next speaker is Professor Chris Murray. He is the head of the director of the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, and also is the head of the Department of Health Metric Science. If I have to introduce all the curriculum of Professor Murray, we can spend more than the time than he's speaking. So I prefer to leave the floor to him, but honestly, I have to thank you sincerely, Chris, for your generosity to share with us your new ideas and also to be part of this adventure of creating the GBD as a journey in the world. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Rafael. It's a great privilege to be here. I am co-chairing a commission on 21st century threats to health with Natalia Kanem, and there's several commissioners here today. And what I'm going to do, following what Rafael asked me to do, is to go through some of the new analyses that the Commission has inspired. So I'm going to talk a little bit philosophically about what we should think about as threats for health in the future and how we might go about a sort of new science of catastrophic risk. Talk about what we think is most likely to occur with or without those catastrophes, and then go through some of the new analyses on the major catastrophic risks, some of which have surprised me, but some of which are perhaps what you expect. So first of all, the idea behind the commission is that in addition to the GBD, which tries to look at the past and the present, we need a more long-term view, because there are many decisions, whether it is preparation for or prevention of or management of major catastrophes that we should undertake. And by having some long-term view, we can perhaps motivate governments and the international community to take those risks more seriously. So we started in the commission with a vigorous ongoing debate about what is a threat. I think we started with the idea that we were coming out of COVID. We should be worried about wars, about pandemics, about climate change, about conflict. But soon dawned on members of the commission that it's very hard to distinguish a slowly changing threat, let's say climate change, from just the regular evolution of health challenges, let's say cancer. And so that's sort of a meaningless distinction. And so we ended up trying to be agnostic to that idea and basically try to look out over into the future as to what will be the biggest sources of health loss, and then back out of that as to which ones we can try to address and find solutions. And so we don't look at a singular focus on what some people call catastrophic risk. We look at all the things that may cause problems in the future. And I'll come back to this question about how we should think about those problems in the future, but we'll end up arguing that it's not the difference, the total amount that we expect, it's how much of the future is amenable to change. And that should prioritize the challenges that we focus our attention on. We had a meeting of philosophers in the summer. We had 23 philosophers from around the world, and we had a very lively debate about how far into the future we should worry. There's a group called long-termists who say we should think millennia into the future. And they're very worried about supervolcanoes. They're worried about asteroids. They're worried about alien life forms. And because if you go out a million years, well, those may be our biggest problems because we don't really have any solutions for supervolcanoes. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the people who still talk about 2030 and the SDGs, so ultra short term. And where we ended up more almost on a sort of qualitative basis, we ended up on the commission picking to the end of the centuries, the next 75 years. Now, there's some good cogent arguments why that's a bad idea. It's too short because even some of the harms that may occur from current problems, like putting carbon into the atmosphere, will play out over 2 centuries. And so there is a case to be made to put that horizon out farther in the future. But our analyses to date are focused on from now to 2100. We run up in our modeling, and it took us a while, or it took me a while, to think of the right framing. And I'm going to give you what I call the paradox of conditional action. So we make what is a reference forecast. We published in May a reference forecast out to 2050. It's what we think probabilistically will occur. But probabilistic forecasts include how governments and individuals and communities will respond to these problems. Take climate change. We expect the current reduction of carbon emissions per unit gross domestic product will continue to decline through a host of regulation and action from individuals to governments. But what if our forecast changes the future? So when you forecast weather, you don't need to worry about this problem. There's nothing that the weather forecasters do that will change whether it rains tomorrow. They can just say, will it rain? But maybe if we forecast and say, climate change is not so bad, maybe governments will take their foot off the brakes and we will go back to more carbon emissions. And so you get the problem that forecasts entail conditional action. And if your forecast can change the future, then you better be sort of worried. And so the way we get around that is we try to frame not just the reference, but a plausible worst and a plausible best, not fiction, but things that are economically, socially, physically, technologically possible. And it's the difference between those that we should keep our eye on. And that gets you out of the paradox of conditional action. And so this is the argument there. And so if you just take that logic of difference between best and worst, well, we don't really care about supervolcanoes because we have nothing currently in sight that will alter supervolcanoes. Likewise, alien life, we don't really have much to offer presently. But we can do a lot about climate. We can do a lot about AMR. We can do a lot about pandemics. We can do a lot about obesity and on. And so we will use that framing to, get rid of some of the risks that people talk about, bearing in mind that science, the advance of knowledge, could radically change our view of what's amenable in the future, which is why we can't do this once. We got to keep thinking about future threats on an ongoing basis. And that will end up being one of our recommendations, I believe, from the commission, that we need a regular assessment of future risk. Now, we run up against the problem that if you have observed things in the past, we can make models. We're very good collectively at making models, even for quite rare events. I will show you some work that one of our PhD students working on the commission, Horacio, who's here in the audience, has used extreme value theory for rare events. We can do that. But if we've never observed something, the evolution of artificial general intelligence, we can't model that. We can't produce quantitative models for events that have never occurred. So then you fall back on qualitative assessment. So there'll be a little dose of that, but the history has shown that qualitative assessment is not so great. And so we should, and I'll put at the end of the results around malicious AI in italics because it's sort of made up. Now, philosophers obsess and have done since the middle of the 19th century with the question of should we care about total or average outcomes, well-being, average well-being or total well-being. And Derek Parfit, probably the greatest philosopher of the last 70 years at All Souls in Oxford, in his famous book, Reasons and Persons, described the repugnant conclusion, which I put there for those of you who want the exact wording. But basically, the idea is if you're a totalist, if you add up the well-being, you should take 10 billion people living great lives and a larger number of people just above the level of misery would be a better outcome than the 10 billion with great lives. And that just seems totally counterintuitive, thus the name, the repugnant conclusion, but follows from a totalist view. Having said that, there are even worse problems with average well-being. We can go into them. And when we polled our 23 philosophers in the summer, I'd say 20 of the 23 were totalists and 3 were average well-being. We think we have a trick to get out of this problem, which is if we count DALYs, which is a negative thing, you actually get out of the repugnant conclusion. There's a few little problems with it that you can come up with really complex scenarios that the philosophers have raised, but it's a whole lot better version of totalism, and that's what we're going to use here for the quantification. Now, if you're a totalist, even if you're counting DALYs, then the size of future population matters a lot. And there's a hidden little weirdness in the climate literature that some of the population projections used in the climate literature are completely and totally implausible. They have population, for example, one of the SSPs, which is the framework used in climate modeling, has world population going to 30 billion people by the end of the next century, which is not going to happen, given what we know about fertility trends and women's education and women's empowerment. And so population in the background, which because it's inconvenient, people don't want to talk about a lot, turns out to be super important. And it builds in a sense, if we believe, as we do on the GBD front in our forecasts, that population peaks around 2060 and just keeps going down, then in some ways you are discounting the next century compared to this century in terms of harm. Okay, a little bit about what we think is the most likely future. This is what we call the reference forecasts. We've published out to 2050 in the Lancet in May, and now we're starting to run these models out to 2100. And you can start to ask the question, well, even before we come to health, what does the future possibly look like? And I'm going to give you a number of metrics that you're used to thinking about. So this is income per capita in 2050 on the left, 2100 on the right. And the colors that are yellow, orange, and red are not great. They're less than 10,000 per capita income. The blues, light blues and the dark blues are pretty good, 40,000 up to $100,000 per capita. So if these forecasts are correct, big conditional if, there's still a lot of inequality in income in this remaining century. And there's still a lot of people who are not absolutely poor, but really quite low on income per capita. And here's alternative views of GDP. It's really, along with population, it's really at the heart of a lot of this modeling, and particularly for climate, because climate models have greenhouse gas emissions scaling to GDP, right? That's how they work. And across the SSPs, these are the 5 scenarios that the UN IPCC uses for climate modeling, and the IHME models, there's enormous variability in the forecasts of future GDP. Bottom right is sub-Saharan Africa, and one of the SSPs that's used has income GDP going up 10x in Africa, whereas many of the other models have it only going up 2 to 4x. Makes a very big difference. Now, on the other hand, years of schooling seems to be a much more regular cadence of progress, given what we've seen in the past, or in the period since independence from the colonial rule in many parts of the world. There's been steady progress in education. And this is years of schooling for males and females, 25 plus. And by the time you get to the end of the century, there's only Niger and Chad and Burkina Faso with levels of schooling below 12 years per person over 25. Extraordinary progress, will be a huge driver of fertility change and probably of economic growth. However, there's a little thing that's going on that some people have started to notice. Camilla Stoltenberg in Norway, who's one of our commissioners, has brought it to our attention, which is pretty much everywhere in the world, after generations of men being ahead of women, that women are now ahead of men. And if you look at entrance into universities in most parts of the world, already women are far ahead of men. And this will continue so that by mid-century, only 2 or 3 places in the world, Afghanistan, South Sudan, will male education be ahead of female education. And by the end of the century, women are way ahead of men in terms of educational attainment. And likely, this is somewhat optimistic because it embeds some catch-up, which I'm not sure we're seeing any evidence of for men compared to women. So, as some of you may know who've read the more recent papers, we have a forecast model. It takes the GBD, fits models by disease, fits models overall, forecast by cause and overall mortality and the burden. This model includes all the risk factors in the GBD, as well as models driven by income and education for what's not explained by the risk factors. We've been doing, in some way, shape, or form, as part of the GBD enterprise forecast since 1997. The methods are much more sophisticated, also more complicated, but allows us to make all sorts of alternative scenarios because we have so many drivers built into the forecasts. Now, if you go out to 2050, which we've published, on the left is the forecast of DALYs for the 3 big cause groups in the burden, communicable, maternal, neonatal, non-communicable, and injuries. And the main reason I show you is this huge continued shift towards NCDs will continue and even accelerate out to 2050. And if you run the models as we are now out to 2100, even more extreme. Child mortality drops to very low rates, but we still have a smattering of countries in these models at the end of the century in orange with child death rates of around about 50 per 1,000. But in most settings below 20 in all of sub-Saharan Africa, except maybe 4 or 5 countries. And in general, you have this steady progress, and the number of child deaths should go down to 2 million by 2050 on current trajectory, and much, much lower by 2100. For life expectancy, a similar story with only a handful of countries with life expectancy in orange on the far right, between 70 and 75. Most countries in the world with male-female combined life expectancy of over 80, shown in blue or dark blue. So that's sort of the reference, the baseline we expect to occur. And then we need to layer on top these harder to forecast phenomena. Now, I'm going to start with not so much a thing when we think of global threats, but many of our commissioners have rightly pointed out that the most powerful underlying drivers of health patterns are poverty and lack of education, and talk about how we're trying to capture that in this threats framework. So first, we need to come up with a way to make our forecasts by cause poverty sensitive, which they are currently not. They're really driven by all the risk factors, which of course are correlated with poverty, and then income and education and fertility rates. But we have a plan to build poverty sensitive measures, and it goes back to the literature on income inequality by Atkinson, this idea that the benefits of income are a sort of curve, a concave curve, where an extra dollar when you're richer has much less of an effect than a dollar if you're poorer, which makes sense. And you can then take one example of that, only one, which is to say, well, maybe a better measure of the effect of income on health and other outcomes is the log of your income. And so what this graph shows is the mean of the log of income per capita at the individual level versus the log of the mean of income at the national level, right? Which is the thing we're used to modeling in these sort of things. They're quite different. They're much lower because there's a lot of very rich people that consume a lot of the money. So you drop below the blue line. And even at countries at the same level of income, there's a big spread, meaning poverty varies or income inequality varies a lot at the same level of income. So we've been studying that. Joe Dielman here is in the audience, who has been doing this work and using some clever new methods of stochastic frontier analysis that our math program that are also present have been developing. And what this shows here on a regular scale is poverty on the y-axis. So this is absolute poverty, and income per capita on the x-axis. And the black line is what we think of as a frontier. It's the best you can do for a given level of income. And we are going to take this frontier, which is a little bit easier to intuit on a log scale, makes a little bit more sense, and say, what if we moved everybody to the poverty frontier? They had pro-poor policies and achieved the best level of poverty, and then run that through our models into the future. Sad to say I don't have the results for that, but they will be part of this analysis so that we can put poverty reduction and a pro-poor policy up alongside of things like tackling pandemics or AMR. So analysis is underway. A first order guess is that these are large effects, very large effects. And we expect that on the log 10 Dallies scale, which we use at the Commission as a shorthand, this would be a very big number, like 10.8. And you'll see that that's up there with things like nuclear war as a possibility for opportunity. Second, diet and obesity. Again, people often don't think about diet, physical activity, and obesity as a threat. But if we look at the numbers and come up with credible scenarios around diet and obesity, reducing over a generation, shifting people to an optimal diet, optimal levels of physical activity, therefore dramatically lowering obesity, we end up saving 500 million plus deaths out to the end of the century, which is about 65 billion Dallies, which is about the same size as going to the poverty frontier. So enormous possible gain through a concerted social effort on tackling diet, physical activity, and obesity. We have benefited from a collaboration with Harvard University, the government department, and in particular Mitsuru Mukagiwara, who has been doing an analysis and scenario building and simulation around nuclear conflict. What is the probability of that? What are the different pathways to nuclear conflict and conventional war? His conventional war model is at a geospatial level, so it's very country specific. The nuclear conflict, by the nature of nuclear conflict, is not. It is either through one of the mechanisms that I'll show in a moment, but overall, he gets as you'd expect, a big range on nuclear war from, on average, about 1 billion Dallies up towards the sort of 10 billion Dally mark, or log 10. Now, there are 3 pathways for nuclear conflict. Accidental use, that is where there is an unintended, sort of what almost happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis, unintended breakdown of communication or false message to people in charge of nuclear missiles that almost led to, and there's a database of this, so you can actually model these near misses, if you will, for nuclear conflict. There's many more than people are aware of. It's actually quite frightening. If you read this literature, we have been quite close to nuclear war many more times than the Cuban Missile Crisis. The closest, I think, most political scientists think is 1982, when there were NATO war games, and for some reason, a spy in the Kremlin alerted Ronald Reagan that they thought these were real. And so we came very close in 82. International actual conflict leading to nuclear exchange, and then terrorist use. And terrorist use is smaller than you might have thought because it's so far been very hard to get a hold of fissionable materials in any large quantity. I won't go through his conventional war model. It's much smaller numbers. We all, war's in the news. It's terrible. It's very focal, but at the catastrophic level, it is not anywhere near the magnitude of the things I've spoken about so far. Climate. Everybody wants to talk about climate. As part of the Commission work and at IHME, we now have a very robust set of climate analyses, temperature, modeling of floods and storms, modeling of PM 2.5 and wildfire, malaria and dengue transmission due to vectors moving into areas that weren't previously available for transmission, childhood stunting and wasting, the poverty driven by higher temperatures, and then the part that we have not yet tackled but are seeking to and starting to that work is migration, and which we expect to be large, and political instability from mass migration. Now, in this work, what turns out is, like I sort of foreshadowed before, what we think is going to happen to income and population is the main driver of the climate scenarios. So you have population up there, enormous range of the different scenarios that people are using, big range in GDP on the top right. CO2 is driven, a big range across the scenarios. And the driver on the bottom right is the greenhouse gas emissions per unit GDP, moderate range, but 2x, 2 to 3x range on CO2 emissions. So you put all these together, you can come up with very, very different scenarios. And maybe RCP 8.5, the higher climate scenario, is a bit too high. It takes an implausible population and an implausible GDP growth and implausible CO2 emissions. Maybe 7.0 or one of the less extreme scenarios is the upper bound. So I'm just going to give you a smattering because they're interesting. This is more for entertainment than the final numbers. So here is the reference forecast for storm days. Interestingly, tropical storms only occur in certain parts of the world. Unfortunately, they occur a lot here in Mexico, the Caribbean, Southeast US. There are no storms in most of Africa. Only Madagascar and Malawi, not Malawi, and Mozambique get significant storm days. And then you can see other parts of the world with tropical storms. So it's a very focal, but obviously very tangible. And here on the bottom is the difference in storm days between the reference forecast in the future, taking into account temperature rise and precipitation change, which are very focal, compared to the past. And so you see the areas in red where we expect more storm days in the range of 2 to 4 days, right? So these are, and the reason we can do this is that NOAA, the US organization, has tracked storm tracks for the last 40 years. So we have really good data, and so you can do this. I'll skip that. Malaria and dengue. Big surprise. As you zoom in and look carefully, it turns out for malaria and dengue that the way you model malaria, whether or not you factor in income and spend on malaria makes a huge difference to the models. And even if you do either way, hotter is worse for malaria because you have these areas move into the range of temperature where mosquitoes desiccate, the anophelines that translate malaria. So everyone thought there'd be more malaria. The worse it gets, turns out to be the opposite. So it's pretty interesting. But either way, malaria is not going to explode. It could go up modestly or it may go down. And that's the global view. So climate and health turns out to be super complex, with some countries like Canada benefiting, or Russia, because you have bigger reduction in cold deaths than the increase in heat deaths. Overall, big increase due to heat deaths. We expect in our current modeling about 160 million deaths out to the end of the century from climate. This is a 9.9 compared to the 10.8 we saw for poverty or for diet in terms of the log tallies. So large risk, but not certainly the largest. The largest burden of climate is going to be in these models, NCDs, not infectious disease. And we expect that climate will dramatically increase inequality. Pandemics. Well, there's this branch of statistics called extreme value theory, where we can go back and look at all the pandemics in history and look at what is if you have a big pandemic, what's the expected value of the pandemic? Horacio has been doing this work using a generalized Pareto distribution. I won't go into the stats detail. These are a database of historical pandemics. You can fit very nicely to the historical pandemic database. And if you take these models and run them to 1950, and then say what happened from 1950 to present, which includes HIV, which includes COVID and some smaller flu pandemics, they're spot on. They do a really good job of predicting the last 70 years. So we have some confidence that they're not bad. And that means that we end up, I need to go back. we end up with about a cumulative mortality for the future of up to 300 million deaths, better to worse, from pandemics, between really doing a great job keeping pandemics and then the worst case scenario. So that's a little bit higher than climate change, about a 10.3. AMR, we published this paper in September for the high-level meeting, so we've already done a lot of the analysis for AMR. We've analyzed the historical data for AMR and then run models out to 2050, and then now we'll extend these models to 2100. And interestingly, the key driver of AMR is aging, because what we see is being a big decline in AMR deaths under age 15, because we've prevented many infections in kids, and a huge increase over age 70. They've largely balanced each other out in the past, but now with demographic shift, AMR will just keep going up. And so we'll get up to about 1.6 million deaths by 2050, and probably that just keeps going because of aging to get to 2.5 million by the end of the century. And that gives us about 130 million expected deaths from AMR, and that gives us a 9.6. So smaller than climate change, but not hugely smaller. And I'll skip this slide in sake of time. Now, many commissioners, rightly so, are very concerned about mental health and addiction. And we do see some data, the Australian Mental Health Survey, Dutch GBD data that's much more recent than other surveys, showing a big surge in anxiety and somewhat depression post-pandemic, and also in time to the spread of social media. But even when we run those into the future, the harm is there, but it's not in the league of the big risks that I've been describing. So big problem to worry about, but not in the same magnitude. However, this slide on the death rate in age 30 to 34 from 2000 to present highlights the drug part, which is, this is the percent increase in total mortality in that age group by country in the last generation. And all the places in orange and red and yellow are large increases, as large as 150% if mortality in that age group, also true for 35 to 39. So there are parts of the world, predominantly here in the Americas, where fentanyl has led to huge increases in deaths in those age groups. What about malicious use of AI? Well, we have a very hard time quantifying this. All we can do is use these websites where so-called experts have predicted their P-doom, and you can make of it what you will. The one thing about malicious AI, unlike everything I've spoken about so far, it is a potential existential risk. You could have species extinction. So it's in a different class, even though we know very little about it. And so it is worth worrying about. And that leads me to my last slide here, which is, in order of the big threats, malicious use of AI, autonomous AI, unaligned AI, however you want to think about it, at the top in italics, because who knows. But it is the one that is a true existential risk. And then in order, poverty, diet, physical activity, obesity, pandemics, climate change, war, and then AMR. And war, depending on the scenario, could go up on that list quite a bit. But I think you can argue about the more extreme civilian targeting nuclear exchanges. So that's where we've got to on risks. And it's a really interesting new extension of what we do in the burden, trying to think about the things that aren't frequent enough in the past that they're going to show up anyway in the models. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Dr. Murray. El ejemplo es bien claro. A veces no queremos saber tanto porque nos ponemos más nerviosos cuando tenemos menos información. I have to say and excuse my boss that she has another commitment at noon. However, we will stay here. But thank you very much, Dr. Sepulveda, to join us for this meeting. And in the moment that you feel free, Uh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Fatima Mariño. I have to express my gratitude to that she accepted at the last minute to speak with us. Always, we are very good friends, and always she tells me yes when I ask something. So I a little took advantage. But she's going to share with us all the process of the Brazilian network of GBD, which is maybe one of the most successful work of collaboration. And I think we have to listen carefully, the Mexicans, how Brazil always do these things, because they are o mayor do mundo.
The best.
The best. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rafael. Good morning, buenos días a todos y todas. Sí, voy a hablar un poco de la experiencia en Brasil, pero solo voy a tomar dos temas, ¿está bien? Por el tiempo. Assim, hay una, desculpe, there is a timeline. A timeline that we did, so we started in 2014 officially. Okay, with a meeting in the capital, Brasilia. Chris was present, Rafael as well. So this meeting, we started to organize the network now with governments and academics. So we started in 2014, and we have this meeting, and we have in 2015, so a grant from the Ministry of Health and agreement through one university. That's the Federal University of Minas Gerais, that's one state. And we start with training people. Also, we started small, training people first in 2015, 2016, and we start to spread this training. Now, in 2017, we published our first supplement in a journal to show the first analyzed results of the GBD results subnational level for Brazil. So we started this publication. So because the network needed to be more close to the results and start to work with this. Also, we have this interest of the government, knowing more about the risk factors, the impact of the public policy. So in 2018, we have the IAC meeting in Rio. So there is this photo. So we still, in this meeting, we discussed a lot about small area estimates. That's so we start in this moment, in this year, to focus a lot in small area estimates. And in 2019, we have this training, online training. We started to train more people in the health, from health services in general, so also in academics. 2020, we published another supplement in population health metrics. And in 2021, we have the start a partnership with Professor Emanuela Kakdu about gender-based violence, and also with the Gates Foundation and GBD Brazil. And we have in 2022 another thematic issues of publications analyzing the data, 2023 agreements with IHME and the universities, and in 2024, we are working, this paper was released soon. Okay, so we have 25 Brazilian and international institutions and governments in the network. We could have more states and municipalities, health departments, but we need more people working with us. Have some limitations, But we have here started this work with basically it's the Ministry of Health and the consortium of health departments, state level, municipality levels, and we have academic institutions working together or articulated. So I talked a little bit about training. and the Memo of Understanding. So we signed the Memo of Understanding with Professor Mosenegavi was present, and Professor Deborah Malta, the coordinator of the network. And Mosen went this year, to the south of Brazil, to give him a training again. And here we have the online training in Portuguese and Spanish. Why Spanish? Because we speak Portuguese. Because we have this area of free commerce in the South Cone, now more than South Cone, because Bolivia is also in the Mercosur. And we started, so they asked us to work in training about GBD because we needed to compare our data, our issues, mortality, risk factors, and so on. So countries have different data qualities. So GBD is one way to do it. So that's why we started with this relation with Professor M. And we also started with the community of Portuguese language speaking. So with the great majority, the countries are in Africa, but we started this training with them, and started with this collaboration with them, but with some analysis. Now we have an invitation, because today in the afternoon, 5 p.m. in Brazil, 2 p.m. here, we'll launch the new training, online training, in Portuguese and Spanish. So Professor M will be in the launch of the training. So we are focusing also in not just academics, but also in health workers. So the plan is, like the last training, we have around 1,000 people taking the training, and now we are projecting more people training because we need more people aware about the GBD. How is GBD, the methods, and so on. So this is one part of the work. So course and training, and also we have this graduation course in GBD. So here is another activity. It is small area estimates. So we are developing a website, and we are testing causes of death correction methods based on Brazil's data and strategies. So this is another effort in methods. Why small areas? Now, this is a website, it's public. Why small areas? Because for public policy, I need to focus. Now, just the subnational level by state is not enough. It's good to project trends, discuss, but for evaluate impact, I need to go to close. So also in Brazil, we have this, you see, I can have a national picture, and also I have it by municipality or one special aggregation of municipalities that is, we call health regions. Because small municipalities, like municipalities with 10,000 inhabitants, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, I can have one hospital in each city. So it's not cost effective. So they have this consortium. And it is officially created. So this consortium works together, but they need data, comparable data. And also when we have it, we go to this north in Brazil and central west, the data don't have a good quality. So how can I need to improve it to make comparable data? So that's why we are also approaching this way, because the consortium of the health department, municipalities, health department asked us to help them to do it. And we need to apply correction. So we follow the methods of GBD, but we are using our data. How? You said, well, okay, but how are you doing this? So, okay. You see that in the black, that's numbers. N is no, and S is C. Yes, no? So we have the way that you work organized the mortality information systems, that it is managed by the Ministry of Health. You see that in the S, sim, or yes, that's the number of causes of death investigated by year. Okay, what? We started officially in 2010, started before, but officially by decree in 2010. To do it, municipalities and states, they received incentives, money, because they need resource. Okay, how can they do it without resource? No. So we have these results. Now we have it since 2009, but it's better since 2017. And we started to test it. So can I use these results? Like I have one, what you call initial cause of death, underlying cause of death. And there is an investigation. So the cause of death changed. So I have the final underlying cause of death. So it is all in the database for transparency. So we have the initial and we have the final. Okay, so it's in the database. Also, there are some reports from local level. The reports, they make some reports, and there is a manual for them, a protocol, and priorities. Okay, so they act together, but it's not a sample. That's one issue for us, to make this assumption that the results of his investigator, I could apply for what's not investigated. No, but okay, we attach. So we have some papers published, we have more papers published about it, and we are releasing soon a new one, 2 new papers with these results that we wanted to, it's a testing. No, I will show you some results. So comparing with this one is for external causes. We got suicides and falls here. I have all the external causes investigated, comparing with GBD 2021. You see in green, that's the crude data. Okay, in blue, IHME estimates, and in orange, our correction, using our investigation here. Okay, so you see the trends, it's a little bit different. So suicide is increasing, especially with pandemic, peaking suicides, and falls as well. Increases in trends looks like that will stabilize. No, but this paper was approved for publication, to be released soon. So it's one experience. So we have this for national level, state, and municipality levels, because we are focused also in small areas. So that's the testing experience. We're experiencing new methods for ourselves to use and apply, focusing in public policy and measuring impact of this public policy, working with this consortium of health departments. This one is maternal death. It's one priority of our government. And you see that we put 2009, because when we started this surveillance, we call death surveillance. In red, the crude data. In black, the data after investigation. You see that how we increase the numbers of maternal death. Okay, but how do we do to have the indicator, maternal mortality ratio, what we have to report for SDGs? So you see here in 2023, this is states and municipalities. There is an agreement, they sign an agreement. They have to investigate 85% at least of the women of reproductive age. okay? It's volunteer, but they receive funds to do the investigation, so they sign it. If they don't get the target, it's proportional. They receive the money proportional what they get. But you see that in 2023, we have a lot. It's around 65,000 deaths a year. So in the investigation, in the average is 87%. Okay, so we are using this to apply that correction data. And after this, so it's what we release in the database. However, now comparing with IHME in orange, our data, number of deaths, in blue, IHME number of death estimates. You see that we have, the Speak IHME will publish a new estimates. Of course, they will capture this peak during the pandemic. Now, just to show the difference in the time series here. Of course, it's not our indicator, because for maternal mortality ratio, we apply another correction, but it's not in the database. The database is like you see here, okay? But for the estimates for report SDGs, for instance, we have these methods that we, after years of investigation and results and evaluating the quality of the investigation done by municipalities, health departments of municipalities, we figured out that a minimum increase of 34% in the data must occur. So if the state investigates X number of deaths, like 90%, and increases the number of deaths in 20% or 25%, when we release the indicator, we will increase it until get this 34%, because it is based, they say, in the average of observed in states that investigate at least 98% of death among women of reproductive age. So we have these results. Like I have one state that investigates 100%. They increase 67% number of maternal deaths. So that's what now the Minister of Health and the government in general asked us to update it, because we created it in 2017. But they said that now, like you saw here, investigation increased a lot. They are saying, no, maybe we could review these methods. No, because it's an agreement, no? So we use the data, transparency, we have this high-level meeting and discuss, no, and we propose this correction, was accepted in 2017, and now they ask us to update it, to review it for next year. So we prepare this analysis and get a consensus, and we have this meeting with the government if they approve the new indicator, because they wanted to report in SDGs. All the government has to report, no, and we don't want to just report the national average, but by states. So that's part of this network methods. And we have this gender-based violence. We have just a social communication here as a result. But one focus that we have for small areas and gender-based violence, it is inequalities. Brazil is an unequal country, unequal, probably most unequal. I don't know if it's most, but it is really, the inequality is high. So what we see here with Professor M, it is, so Black women more affected by gender-based violence and femicides and so on. We use here records linkage, because we created in the past, 2010, a system that it is surveillance of violence reported by health service. So health service reported in a system that is a surveillance system, And we started to link, a record linkage of reported violence and mortality. So you can see now the threats. We have, in the case, we have a national studies and we have a case studies. So case studies is more to focus in small areas. Case studies with cities and one state government. So focusing the determinants. So poverty is one determinant, but be a Black woman, it is a high risk for a femicide or be a victim of violence. So here we have now, in one state, we attached, we was working the paper because we finished the analysis and we're working a public panel because we have a public dashboard, we have linked health data with police data. No, and now we are discussing Ministry of Justice to unify, not to unify, but to exchange data officially, because I have a record linkage, health data, mortality in hospital with police data reporting also violence against women and children. So we have it, so we could compare criminal classification with our health, classification. So we realized that for Black women, police don't report well. Of course, it's better for a Black woman come to a health service and talk about the violence, or health, usually health workers, and social workers, they capture more this in our community agents. And when for police, it's real, they don't have this courage to go to a police station to report. So they are afraid. So just white women. So the white women, so are more reported police than Black women. But in the health, it's the opposite. So when we put together all the data, so we can see the picture, the complete picture about this and femicide. So we could give this have this discussion, give orientation for this state to work and open more this police report, creating more police stations driven by a woman. Because it's more, so have this support for this kind of women, create some places that is easy to report. So this is one part of the work, the other is improving this notification. So we are evaluating that primary care is not reporting well. Why? Because they are threatened by the aggressors at local level. So we are developing an AI tool to identify, by semantic, identify violence. So it's a long story. I don't tell this entire story here, okay? But just to tell that we are testing one city, but testing another one city. The tool is been working well. Identify what wasn't reported before. So like the new perspectives, the last slide, okay? So we are updating the website for small areas as municipalities, and we have all the entire country. We have this new supplements publication. Now we estimate mortality, obesity, causes of death, so apply this new experience methods. And we have the estimates of the burden of violence against women with IHME, Gates Foundation, with this national, supranational, and case studies, trying to get the picture, big pictures, small, medium, and small. And the development of methods for the distribution of garbage codes based on this surveillance. And second edition of GBD, Portuguese and Spanish, launching now, today, and raise the study estimates of the current burden of Chagas disease, because Brazil has the highest burden in Chagas disease. And the GBD Brazil capstone will be released soon. So in summary, just two, okay? Strategies we apply, we have others, but this is, I believe, for the method, this is one focus that we have been dedicating time and effort to improve it to attend these needs of the local level authorities and health departments. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for your presentation. We have more lessons to learn with the Brazilians network, particularly how to promote improved quality of data. They have too many assets like linkage of data. In Mexico, we have always isolation and silos of data that we need to do by hand sometimes, the connection. Let me say that I didn't mention, and was my fault, and Dr. Murray is the creator, is the first person with Alan Lopez that started with the global burden of disease. That happened 33 years ago. So I started doing the GBD 31 years ago. That put us in the position of dinosaurs of the GBD. Now let me introduce Dr. Emanuela Gakidu, if she allowed me to say that she is a sort of young dinosaur, because also she's younger, but she started a while ago doing this business, and she is in charge of the risk factors and social determinants estimates in the GBD, and now she's going to present to us the experience of obesity that I believe is going to be published soon.
Thank you, Rafael.
Take the floor.
Okay, this is a loud microphone. Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por su hospitalidad a las colegas de la UNAM. Es un honor estar aquí en las instalaciones de la UNAM por este encuentro. Thank you, Rafael. I believe this is the first time I've been called a dinosaur, so I'm considering it a great achievement. I will take a few minutes so Chris presented a lot of the threats that are current and upcoming. And for those of you that may have seen that rank list towards the end, obesity, diet, and physical activity were towards the top. I'm not really sure what to do about malicious AI. Then there was poverty in education, which this field we can advocate for, but it's not within our control. In terms of what is within our control, as public health professionals, global health professionals, we're here in the School of Medicine. This is one of the threats that we can do something about today, and we should. This talk is going to be very bleak. I do not have any good news. The statistics are petrifying and very depressing. My team and I have been writing up these manuscripts, and it is really disheartening. So I hope that by the end of this talk, you will all join me in the fight against obesity, because it is really terrible. I have started with some of the super depressing facts just to motivate why this is so bad. So Chris was mentioning we've looked at the past to the present. We're also looking into the future. So for now, I'm just going to focus on the next 3 decades, because that's a timeline that everyone in this beautiful outdoor space can relate to. We hopefully will all be alive in 2050, and so will our children. So for those of you that cannot read the slides, let me point out some of the highlights. So in the past 3 decades, among children and adolescents, the prevalence of being overweight or obese, a BMI greater than 25, has doubled. The prevalence of obesity among children and adolescents has tripled over the last 3 decades. And the prevalence of obesity among adults, so if you look at the population over the age of 25, has doubled also. Now, if we take the trends and forecast them into the future and look at what this looks like for 2050, it is terrible. 1 out of 3 children and adolescents, so this is, we're looking at everyone below the age of 25, will either be overweight or obese. And 1 out of 7 or 1 out of 6, depending on how generous you want to be with accounting, are going to be obese. These are incredible rates for something that is within our control and we can prevent as a global health and public health community. If we look at adults, 2 out of 3 adults over the age of 25 are going to be either overweight or obese, with 1 out of 3 expected to be obese. Okay, is everyone with me about why this is terrible? Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, still staying within obesity. A lot of the times the work of the global burden of disease appears to be very complicated. I'm going to show you why this is not. Also, Dr. Sepulveda talked about training courses that will be happening at UNAM. So if you're interested in learning how you can also contribute to these estimates, I'm going to walk you through our key steps at a very high level. So this is really not one of those very complicated methodological approaches. A lot of what we've heard about today involve very complex methods. This is very straightforward. We have 4 steps in the estimation of our risk factors. As the first step, we look for all the data, absolutely all the data we can find, and we extract it. Specifically for overweight and obesity, when we have people reporting on their height and weight, we know that there's a lot of differential reporting, so we need to adjust it to make sure that we remove any bias. Then in the third step, and in our attempt to use all the data, where we find data that's not exactly in the shape that we needed, so maybe it reports for broader age groups or males and females combined, we manipulate the data to give us more estimates that we can work with. And the final stage is where we run our models, where we, out of these models, we produce the average BMI and then the proportion of the population that is overweight and obese. So a little bit more about each of these steps, and hopefully this is going to inspire everybody to want to work on the GBD with Rafael and with us and with Fatima. So this is the number of data sources that we have identified that can be used in the estimation of the prevalence of overweight and obesity and BMI. And I have the map on the left shows them for the population under the age 25, and we're not looking at children under the age of 5. We're starting at age 5 here. And the map on the right is the population above the age of 25 years. So the color scheme of this on these maps that I'm going to be showing today is the same as the color scheme that Chris was also showing. So red is bad, blue is good. There's no political undertone to this, even though the US election is tomorrow. These are the standard IHME colors. I just realized that this may not be the best week for these colors, but so you can see that generally we have pretty good data coverage for height and weight. A lot of it comes from household surveys. A lot of countries have a lot of household surveys. The countries in blue tend to have more than 30 or 50 data sources that we can use in the estimation, and the countries in the shades of red are generally under 10 data sources that exist. But there's almost no country that we don't have data, very small number of countries that we don't have data. So as far as measurement in the field of global health goes, this is pretty good data coverage. So we take all these data and we extract them. And then the key step for measuring the prevalence of obesity and overweight is adjusting for the bias that comes when you ask people to report on their height and weight. And initially we thought that the bias is fairly straightforward. We could really characterize very easily. It was generally believed that women would underreport their weight and men would overreport their height. We've looked into this in a lot more detail, and it's actually super interesting, and we're going to keep digging into it. I'm going to show you one example from Mexico, and I hope people can see this across the screens. The pattern of reporting on your own self, on your own height and weight has changed over time. It's different for men and women, and it also depends on where you are on the BMI spectrum. So here we have 3 panels. The top one is the oldest data, the middle one is from 2000 to 2010, and the bottom one is since 2010, so older, medium, more recent. The 5 panels, the 5 columns are quintiles of BMI. So we have split the population into groups of BMI. And I'm showing here the results for females. The x-axis is when you measure people. So when there's someone in the household survey that has a scale and a meter and they measure it. And on the y-axis is when people self-report. And the dots represent the average BMI from one or the other and the different colors represent different age groups. So in the interest of not staying here all day, because I can talk about data all day, at a glance, what you can see is that the pattern varies depending on people's BMI. So the relationship between measured and self-reported is different for people that are on the low end of BMI versus the people that are obese and severely obese. It also has varied over time, and that could be potentially suggesting that the social acceptability of having a higher BMI has increased over time, and that's why we see less of a deviation. And it also changes by age. So this is something that we spend a lot of time trying to characterize, because most of the data we get from household surveys is self-reported. So how you adjust from self-reported to measured is really impactful on the final results. The next step in the estimation is where we take data that get reported in a format that is not what the GBD needs. The GBD needs 5 years age groups separately for males and females. But we want to use all the data we have available. So for example, we might get a report or a table from a study that says the prevalence of obesity for both sexes combined is 30% for the age group 15 to 49. And what we do there is we take all the more individual level data we have to understand the age pattern and the sex pattern of obesity in that population. And then we distribute that 30% across ages and across sexes. And this is, if you talk to anybody in the GBD and they say age sex splitting, this is what it means. So we just try to make the most of the data by informing it by other information we have available. And then the last step is we use what we call established GBD methods. It's a space-time Gaussian process regression that we use in most of our risk factors, where essentially after we've made all the data points comparable, we put them on a graph and we fit the best model through them. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But the point I wanted to make with this graph is that where you have a lot of data, the method we use generally just follows the data. So the areas in the GBD where the methods have a bigger impact are the data sparse areas. In the area of obesity and overweight, we're in a data-rich situation. And so you can see the black line kind of fits through the colored points. I am going to pull out one age group so you can see in more detail what the model does. This is, again, for females in Mexico. Each little square was an age group, and I'm here magnified and zoomed in on the age group 25 to 29 years. And you can see the orange dot represents data that came from actual measurements, and the purple dots represent self-report. And just for this age group, you can see that the trend in the self-reported is pretty flat, but in the measured, there's a pretty significant increase in BMI over time. So that was a crash course in GBD methods. And I'm now going to shift to some key results. So look, starting globally, because this is a global threat, and there is actually no country that is immune to it. I'm showing here the prevalence of both, this is the prevalence of obesity, both for children on the left and for adults on the right. And I'm showing both sexes combined because in the interest of time, I was just trying to minimize the number of graphs and maps, but the trends are quite similar for males and females. There are some differences, with generally females doing worse than males in many parts of the world. The darker the red, the higher the rate of obesity. And for children, the darkest category is greater than 30 or 35%. For adults, I apologize, the legend is not coming through very clearly. The most deep red is greater than 60%. So it's about an order of magnitude different between children and adults. But generally, the shades of red represent the countries that have the highest rates. And you can see quite clearly here that the Americas are not doing very well for children and adolescents and are pretty bad for adults. But as well, we see North Africa and the Middle East as another region with very, very high rates of obesity across the life course. The one area that doesn't show up on the maps is the small Pacific islands in the region of Oceania that also have super high rates of obesity. I'm going to skip this one, and I'm going to show you the petrifying trend graphs, which are if we look back to 1990, all the way on the left, all the way to 2050, again, children and adolescents are on the left and adults are on the right. These line graphs, I don't know if this is a pointer. Each line represents a super region of the world. And these are showing the past to present trajectory of the prevalence of essentially BMI above 25, so overweight and obesity, and then where we're projected to go in the next 30 years. And you can see that there isn't really any region that is doing well. There isn't really any region that has reversed the obesity epidemic. And if I superimpose Mexico on this, just because we're in Mexico right now, unfortunately, Mexico leads the world. The top red line here for children and adolescents is for Mexico as a country. Of course, we're comparing it here to some of the other regions, so you could say maybe this is not a really fair comparison, but I do want to highlight that Mexico has a very big challenge with overweight and obesity. If we look at adults, it's the second from the top line, and you can see that the rates of increase are really high as well, as shaded in red. Oh, this graph is really not coming through with so much fun, but this is one of the most compelling ways of showing the evolution of the rates of obesity and overweight over time, with each successive generation getting worse and no end in sight. So these are what we call cohort graphs, and on the left is the graph for females. On the right is the graph for males. The x-axis is age, and the y-axis is the prevalence of obesity. And each of the different colors represents a different birth cohort. So if we follow individuals by when they were born. So if you take one point, say for the age of 50, the cohort that was born in 1930, the maximum rate of obesity they exhibited by the age of 50 was about 2022 for females. And if you look at the cohort that was born in 1970 or 1975, that has now reached a level of about 50%. If you look at if you're able to see the lines, you will see that none of them cross, which means every 5-year cohort is getting worse. The rates of obesity are going up and up and up. And in the younger ones, the rates are really steep as well. So the worst is yet to come unless we intervene. This is a graph that is showing over time for the different regions and the globe, the proportion of children and adolescents with obesity in the younger age group, 5 to 14 and 15 to 24. And the different shades represent the different time periods. So in blue is the earlier time periods, and in green is the upcoming next couple of decades. And so what you can see is that right now we're at a critical point of intervention, massive intervention needed, because the worst is yet to come. There's a lot more green than blue on these graphs, which means the next few decades are when we expect to see massive increases in the rates of children and adolescents with obesity. And we do have a window of opportunity, because adolescents that are overweight, it can reverse much more easily than adolescents that have already become obese, where reversal is really complicated. So in terms of where we go from here, I will not stand here claiming that I have the answers, but looking at the picture globally, looking at the picture locally, I think it's absolutely clear that we need some drastic intervention. By drastic intervention, I mean not more of the same of what we have been doing. There have been a lot of attempts on trying to curb the increasing rates of overweight and obesity, and we are not seeing huge successes. And then despite the availability of data, we do have data gaps, particularly for adolescents and young children. And so I am also making a call for national surveillance of obesity, or of height and weight, particularly in children and adolescents, because if we can't track it year to year, then we really don't know if we're making progress. But I would like to invite you to brainstorm all together on what are the types of interventions that might actually bend the curve in overweight and obesity, and what types of bold and comprehensive reforms we can come up with collectively, because this will take collective action, it will take political commitment, and it will need to be intersectoral because it touches across all areas of society. Thank you very much. I hope I was not the talk before lunch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emanuela, for your kind presentation. I have to apologize all the Mexicans to come and listen. Bad news, very, very bad news. And we need to pay attention to this because it's a cohort problem, and maybe it's quite connected with our inheritance to the next generation. So if someone has to apologize to the next generation, we don't have to expect apologizes from outsiders. It's this very, very local problem, and we cannot be proud to be the top in the world. We want to be the top in football, but that's impossible. So the last presentation, but not the least, and it's very important for me, and let me switch to Spanish, porque estoy muy emocionado de presentar al doctor Peter Piot. El doctor Peter Piot es una de las personas que más han influido la salud mundial, como el doctor Murray y como las nuevas generaciones, pero en particular él ha recorrido actividades que tienen que ver con ser el director de UNAIDS en Naciones Unidas, la agencia que estaba en el control del SIDA. También tuvo la fortuna de estar en el grupo que descubrió el ébola, el virus del ébola en el mundo. Gracias a él y a su grupo podemos tener el conocimiento y posibilidades, no de evitarlo, pero sí saber de lo que tenemos enfrente. También el doctor Piot fue director de la escuela, de la ancestral escuela de higiene, de la, nada más lo puedo decir en inglés, lo siento, London School of Public Health, pero es importante decirlo que no es un director, es como un presidente un rector de una universidad, y eso da mucho valor a su presencia. Entonces, para mí es un gran honor tener aquí al doctor Peter Piot y escuchar su experiencia y lo que serían las conclusiones de esta sesión, y si tenemos tiempo daremos oportunidad a algunas preguntas y respuestas de la audiencia. Dr. Piot, do you want to take you? Yeah, you can.
Muchas gracias, Rafael. Y, buenas tardes a todas y todos. Para mí siempre es un gusto estar en México. Deben saber que yo nací en Bélgica, pero en mi sangre hay genes latinos. Además, mi espíritu es muy cercano a los latinos, a pesar de ser europeo. So it's really a pleasure to be in Mexico and to be here. I remember the first time I've been there maybe 10 times, but first time was in 1998. I was reminded by a friend here, was at the National AIDS Conference, when it was quite how to say, exciting times, because there was not only HIV and AIDS, but it revealed also a lot of societal issues about sexuality and so on, and that came there. And then there was also the International AIDS Conference in 2008, where was also a major event in terms of progress, both on the science side and on the involvement of civil society, because that's something that I thought was very precious here in Mexico. The response to AIDS was embedded in not only well, in civil society in the first place, sometimes in government, sometimes not, depending on the time, and in the States. And we had this is our second meeting. We're very honored that UNAM is hosting the meeting of the Independent Advisory Committee of the Global Burden of Disease. And it's the second time. 10 years ago, it was in Cuernavaca at the Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública. And that was also, for me, you could see that was a part of how to say, a greater involvement of global burden of disease in countries. And we have two of the prime examples here. We heard from Brazil, and also we'll hear this afternoon a lot about what's going on here in Mexico. So, but it's now, you know, this is now about 30 years, the dinosaur here next to me, that the burden of disease has been on the agenda and the study of it here in Mexico. So I'd like to add a great thank you to Rafael for being a pioneer in this. Not only dinosaur, I think, is a pioneer. And not only for Brazil, but also for countries in the region. So that's because you've been bringing together many different, to say, actors in this. And as we all know, in public health, in data and so on, can have very strong personalities who don't necessarily like to work together. So this has been another achievement. Maybe you need a special doctorate in psychiatry for that, not only in epidemiology. But it's now it's equally important that we now have new generations taking this over and continue to promote the methodology, not only the results, but it's also this type of spirit, this type of approach and methodology at national and state levels. And there's also, we heard from Fatima, even at district level. And I was very pleased to hear from Dr. Sepulveda that the university here is including now not only the study of the methodology and GBD and so on, even at undergraduate level, because I think that's where we need to start. It's not something that as a postscriptum when you already have a PhD or you're doing it. So that it is part of the basic thinking of people who are working in the health, and I would say beyond health. I hope it will go beyond the faculty of medicine, but this is equally important for those who are into economics and social sciences and so on. Just think of what Chris Murray presented of the drivers of health threats. I mean, most actually are outside of the classic biomedical field. And that's certainly also true what M just presented, you know, on obesity. Although we have now an injection where we can do something about it. I think that the way I see it is that the GBD is a global public good. There's no doubt about it, and it's a very precious one, which will continue to evolve. And a tribute to Chris and your team, you know, for the continuing innovation, because that's been lacking in public health and in surveillance. It's been too much always of the same stuff. And it's not only boring, but it's losing its relevance over time. And so that new thinking, which I'm sure is not always welcomed by everybody, you know, but is what we need if we want to address the current and future challenges in health and beyond that. And that's in that sense, it's a global public health. However, every global public good, every global good only will have an impact on people's lives if it is not only translated, but is driven also by local, I would say even interest, not only data, but also the people who can not only interpret it, but feed it. So it is often also for the countries to interpret what to do. Now, what I find also very remarkable about the GBD is that by this new, by this innovation in data, it has actually revealed what were kind of invisible threats or invisible health issues. I think a long time ago, that must now be mental health was the World Health Report in what, 2000, and it was still Bruno 2. Thank you. Yeah, you're better. I'm very bad at figures, so I shouldn't be the chair of this thing. But that's, and then there was disbelief. So it can't be true that this is such a burden of disease for just this mental health, musculoskeletal problems. Also the issue of, the demographic transition. Of course, it was already there, but it's actually through this systematic and new approach by the GBD and HME that I hope that is also now getting on the agenda. And that in itself then should be an incentive for improving surveillance. I thought the examples that Fatima gave are really telling a very important story. That is that by identifying or by making estimates gives you also an idea of what are estimates and what are facts and where do we need improvement. And that is then an incentive to to change and to improve the way we collect data, and that's highly relevant then for policy. So I think we should look at the GBD HME beyond the fantastic publications that that are coming out, but it's really the impact it is having, the diffusion of a change of how we're approaching health. And there's still a lot of work to be done. Now, the talks this morning are another illustration that we are at a turning point, many perspectives in the world, but certainly also when it comes to health. And I've been working on global health, and I think we're entering global health is at 2.0 or 3.0 perhaps. It's a term, by the way, that didn't exist in last century. It is a creation of the AIDS movement in a sense, and it's a term that appeared around 2000. But there's a big change going on in terms of the what and the how. The what, we heard a lot about it, and I think that the Lancet Commission that Chris is co-chairing is addressing a lot of that. And the big ones we heard, are indeed that this shift to, let's call it chronic conditions. I don't know whether you can call obesity a disease or not, probably after certain, whatever it is. I'm not in English on my third language, so I don't care about terminology most of the time. And I'm not a philosopher. But it's something that we are now, I'm an infectious disease. Really, these conditions that are driving what causes death and morbidity. And they're really now the major threats. Secondly is the demographic shift. The good news is we live longer, and that's also pretty impressive. Although there are reversals of this life expectancy, as we've seen, so we shouldn't take it for granted. But I look at it as in a positive way, and I should, of course, declare my conflict of interest since I'm 75. But that, I don't talk about aging. I talk about health and longevity. That's what we need. The good news is we live longer. The bad news is that the health span is not following the chronological age. And that's where all these issues, where obesity comes in and all the factors from poverty, etc., that Chris mentioned. And that is something that, again, is not yet on the agenda. I look now at my own continent in Europe, we're sleepwalking into a total catastrophe. Our social security, our health systems, which are probably some of the most equitable in the world, and then retirement plans and social security are doomed to collapse at the current rate of, demographic transition if we don't tackle that. And yet, I still have to meet politicians who have the courage to really take it on. But that's where I got the ideas in Singapore, in Asia, where there is a far more positive approach to that. And instead of saying, aging and we need to get rid of these old people and the dependency ratio and so on, let's see where we have an evergreen society that we can do with that. And then thirdly is the continuing threats. I won't go into it. Chris did it masterfully. I was responsible or advisor on global health and health security in Europe with the European Commission. And whenever I was giving a talk, they wanted me to talk about threats, and they wanted me to talk about epidemic threats. And I always took it over and broadened it in a bigger way. There's far more than that, although we will have. Now, and AMR is one of them. So now, and climate change and all the stuff that he said. But so far for the what, but I think the how is also changing in global health. And our meeting here is an illustration of that. One, and that is that it's no longer a one-way street from the US and Europe and maybe Japan or maybe Australia, because that's where the global south is such a stupid term. I always ask, does that include Australia or what? But it is the fact that, there are now centers of excellence across the world, including in countries that we used to call developing countries. And that the progress, certainly in health, is going to come from a bi-directional type of collaboration, where we can all learn from each other. And the meeting here is an illustration of that. And so there is far more equity that we need and that is happening. Secondly, one of the silver linings for me of the COVID epidemic was the emergence of regional entities as powers far more than the global entities. That's certainly striking in Africa. For the first time, the African Union, through Africa CDC, but also at the political level, we're no longer waiting for charity from the global north to provide with all kinds of things, including vaccines. One, because it was a global crisis, but also it was really the recognition that health and being in control of your health is part of being sovereign. And that is very important. And that's why, we see it here also in the regions. We saw it in Europe. And that these regional entities are going to be far more important players for global health and public health, I think, than the global level. Global level has a function, no doubt about it. But the regional entities are far closer to the realities on the ground and of countries. And that will also involve manufacturing of goods, because we can have treaties that agree on everything. But when a crisis is there, if I were the president or the prime minister of a country, I will give priority to my own people. I'm elected in democracies or not, but, by the people and not from some others. So we need to make sure that there are systems that are actually a fundamental changing power also on the manufacturing side, be it diagnostics and vaccines and so on. And that's a trend that is going on. I was in Brazil a few weeks ago, and there was a meeting of the developing country vaccine manufacturers network in Sao Paulo. And there is really a movement there. And in Brazil, Fiocruz and Butantan is there. And so I think this is a new way in global health that we see. And that's where we see. And then I think on the how, Chris mentioned the AI, all the dangers and they can be, they're real, but also AI and all this digital innovation is also fundamentally going to change how we interact and what is going on. So all these are new ways of both the what and the how that make that we're entering a new phase where the new generation will really hopefully exploit that in a positive way to the max for the benefit of everybody. So I'm really would like to thank everybody, the speakers, but also the people we will see who are working actively here, Latin American Network and in Mexico, on this fundamental issue of health data and interpreting and then working with it, and that this is developing into an ecosystem of GBD, but with a the innovation driven out of IHME. So thank you so much, and I think we should say no time to lose to tackle some of the problems, certainly the obesity one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter Piot. I think you inspire a lot of people to think in the present to change the future. So we have a few minutes for questions, comments. The floor is open to the audience. If someone wants to compete with the coffee. No? Okay. There is a mic here.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations, all of
Will
you.
you introduce yourself?
Oh,
first?
excuse me. I'm Mara Tellez Rojo. I'm researcher at the National Institute of Public Health, and my main interest is environmental epidemiology and environmental health. And my comment is exactly in that regard. I was shocked by the information that you, Emanuela, presented about obesity. And one of the things that always strikes me when we talk about obesity is that we focus on diet and physical activity. But in my perspective as environmental epidemiologist, there's a piece missing, which is environmental exposures that are disrupting, that are endocrine disruptors, like all the chemicals that we are always all exposed, that are precursors of obesity. Have you considered including this piece in the frame that you presented today? They start the damage from the prenatal stage of life, and it's one of the main risk factors for obesity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. Nice to see you again.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to start my answer by saying that I did not have enough time to go into all the drivers of obesity, nor do I think we fully understand them. And you make a very valid point. And I think the response to the obesity epidemic has to be multisectoral, and the environment is absolutely one of them. There were other sectors that also need to be involved in a comprehensive reform. I don't know that we want to spend a lot of time trying to disentangle which one is more responsible. I think the response should be all the ways in which we can intervene on obesity should just become prioritized, and hope that the collection of approaches will make a difference. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
And someone else? There are two more.
Hi, Claudia Nieto, coordinadora de vinculación del Departamento de Salud Pública de la UNAM. I just have a quick question. You were talking about medical students. So I'm wondering, how do you envision medical students using these data? What would be the best outcome? And the second one would be, so there have been some policies or regulations in Mexico trying to curb that obesity prevalence. So I'm wondering if there's any way that these data can take those into account and what would happen next. Thank you.
I'm going to take the Mexican obesity and I take the other one.
Thank you. Specifically in Mexico, some of the regulations that have gone into place on sugar-sweetened beverage taxes and some bans in the school lunches and banning food from children have definitely been really important interventions. What is lacking in the field is an evaluation of the impact of a lot of these interventions on obesity. So usually a lot of the programs get evaluated for their intermediate effect on consumption as opposed to the prevalence of overweight and obesity. And while I personally support a lot of the programs that are in place in Mexico, I think that evidence from the national health surveys that you have, of which you have many, suggests that they are not being as effective as we need them to be. So I wouldn't by no means suggest that we stop those interventions, but we absolutely need an order of magnitude higher level of interventions to curb the trends that we are seeing.
Claudia, your question is a little tricky because we have to explain what exactly means undergraduate preparation or training for other countries and for us, because we have medicine in the graduation and in other countries undergraduate are college. So it's hard to put in the same level. But I offer to you to have a special coffee to talk about that. Another, sorry. Micro, has Vanessa? The micro. First, okay.
Well, thank you. Oh, yeah, it is. Hi, Rodrigo Saucedo from Carlos Slim Foundation. I was interested in the graph that you presented, Dr. Gakide, which you were saying that the self-reported measurements of weight and height are actually not very close to the official measurements, and you were suggesting that perhaps there is now a social acceptance of obesity. But I don't know if in Mexico, especially where now 70% of the population has overweight and obesity, rather than being accepted, is normalized. And then it is actually a greater public health problem because now people don't see themselves as with the disease. And then my question could be how the IHME data can be used to raise awareness among stakeholders and public decision makers that this is not a condition, it's a disease that actually leads to greater public health problems. Thank you.
I would love to talk to you about this more. And thank you for using the word normalization. We had it in our paper that is actually coming out this week in the Lancet, and we had to take it out because there's a lot of resistance to saying that societies have normalized it. So I'm very happy to hear you use that word. And I would love to discuss this more with you. Thank you.
So you can be the third reviewer now. Seventh reviewer. Okay. So the last comment? No? Okay. So I think we need to stop now. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us on this very important meeting. I really like to thank the speakers and ask for an applause for all of them. And now we have a break to socialize a little bit with some coffee, water, and if you want to go to the bread, it's over there. Thank you very much, everyone. To the sea.